No.
All the candidates to Steve. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you. Thank you. All right, don't build it up too high here. Well, I am passionate about water. I volunteer time to those associations because I like to share what I've learned. And I also need to keep up with everything that's going on. Water quality issues are constantly changing, and it really keeps me interested in everything that the new technologies and equipment that comes out, the treatment processes. Staying up with it, I think, is very important, and seems like I'm learning something every day, and I hope that you'll learn something today in this presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about the tap water, but the district does also provide wastewater, stormwater, recycled water, groundwater management, or groundwater replenishment programs, irrigation water, and agricultural drainage. So all of those things have to do with water quality and tie back to our groundwater that we're using for our tap water supplies. And each of them have their own set of regulations that we have to comply with. So we learn a lot about water quality and making sure we comply with those regulations. So first, the main source of our tap water here in the valley is our very large groundwater basin. And that groundwater basin is basically sand, gravel, silts, and clays that have filled up the bedrock basin. It's like a big bowl of sand, and it's thousands of feet thick. And in between those sand particles and gravel particles is the water in the pore spaces. It's not a cavern or a lake down there. It's just sand that's filled up with water. But the space is so large that we've stored a huge amount of water, 39 million acre feet. An acre foot is about how much 1 or 2 homes uses in an entire year. It's an acre or a football field filled up 1 foot high with water. It's a measurement that we use because it's a large one that we can use when we're talking about large volumes of water. The source of that water that's been stored over hundreds, if not thousands of years is the watershed. The mountains, the snow melt, precipitation comes into this valley up near Interstate 10, Windy Point area just west of the windmills. That's the main recharge area for this basin. And so that precipitation has run in. It's filtered through hundreds of feet of sand to get down to the water table. Slow sand filtration. It's one of the simplest and best treatment processes. It removes particles, organic matter, and it leaves us with a very pure water source. And we're envied in many areas because it's such a large basin. But it's important that we work to ensure that we have that long-term supply. We knew that the 50,000 acre feet that comes in each year naturally would not be enough to supply the needs of the valley. So the founders of the water district began early in the processes of getting rights for imported water supplies to replenish that groundwater basin and to substitute sources like the early settlers. That picture down there on the left is down near the Salton Sea where the basin is below sea level. And the early settlers found that just by poking a hole through the clay layers there that confine that basin, the water would come up without pumping. It would come up all on its own. You'd have a head up to 50 feet above ground surface that pressurized water would rise. So it allowed an abundant water supply. Those early settlers were able to start farming that land, and that began the demand on the groundwater basin. This basin is ideally suited for protecting water quality. And it's not because of planning or, now city planners think about this when they're beginning a community. That we had nothing to do with that. It was all natural. The area furthest west in the valley where most of the water comes in, there's no contaminating activities. It's raw land, and that water comes into the basin and replenishes it without having possible contamination. Down on the far end of the valley is the agriculture. Agriculture, they're using a lot of good practices, but over the years in the past, there have been concerns about contaminants that might be used. Fertilizers that we use on our lawns, they use in agriculture, and they do their best to manage that, but there have been cases of contamination of groundwater from farming practices. So that's down in the East Valley where we have that clay confining layer. So we have this shallow perched water that's salty naturally that we don't use. And then we go below that clay layer and use the deep groundwater that's pure. So that clay protects that lower basin. It pressurizes it too. And therefore those farming practices or any other type of practice at the surface, if we had industry, which we don't, they can be possible sources of contamination, but we have that protection. So it was just by the geology helps protect our tap water. We do have a little bit of surface water that's used in the valley. Desert Water Agency uses about 5% of their water comes from Snow Creek. They do a little bit of filtration and supply that into their system. But primarily it's all groundwater. And I'm going to have about 15 slides, and at the end I'll have plenty of time for questions. If there's something you can't wait for, be sure to call my name out and we'll address it then. So the district was founded in 1918. The first action of that board was to start building some dikes up near Windy Point where that water, those flood waters would come into the valley to slow down that water and let it soak into the ground. 1918, they're thinking about replenishing the groundwater and conservation. So we have a long history of doing what we need to ensure we have that high quality tap water. Here shows some of the early dikes that were constructed in the 60s to try to catch some of that floodwaters. This is our most recent groundwater replenishment facility located close to Lake Kauai, and it's on 160 acres. And last year we replenished the groundwater in that area with about 32,000 acre feet. Over the years, since we began in the early 1970s, we've put in over 3 million acre feet of imported water supplies to replenish that groundwater. The percolation rates are very high. We have, in fact, where we locate our recharge facilities is very important for that reason, so that we can ensure we get high percolation rates, get it into the ground. Yes, there is evaporation occurring, but comparatively it's a small amount compared to what's going into the ground. So it's a great way, but it's very key. You got to find good locations. It took about 15 years to find the right location for this facility because of those clay layers that occur down in the Eastern Valley, which would not let us get the water down below into the high quality groundwater. So we had to go outside of those clay layers near the base of the mountains on the Santa Rosa side, the western side of the valley. And we found an ideal location. Yeah, this is about 85 feet above sea level at this location. Indio is about sea level. So it's up above Indio, La Quinta, Thermal, the eastern part of the valley where a lot of the farming is occurring. And so we wanted to ensure we had good water supplies down there. We had already been recharging up in the Western Valley since the 1970s, imported water. So this was our expanded program to catch that Eastern Valley. This one went full scale in 2009, but we had pilot recharge starting in 1997 we started, because we had to do tests to make sure that the water was going where we wanted it, do water quality testing to make sure it doesn't alter the water in any way that would be a problem for us. So make sure the molecules were going where we wanted them to go. So, yeah.